All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Marty Duffy, Liz Rhoades, and Lou Bryson. Plus this week, special guest Colin Spoelman of Kings County Distillery, who I will let your host give a more formal, extended introduction to in just a moment. Before I turn things over, I'm Will Hookinga from Zavvy.co. Just want to point out a couple ways, as always, that you can interact with your hosts and their guests throughout the show today. So to your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where in the world you're joining us from today. It's always fun to see that. If you have a question at any point during the show, there's a little button at the bottom that says Ask a Question. Makes it really easy to do exactly that. So enter your questions in down there. We'll keep an eye and either sprinkle them throughout the show or save them till the end. And last but not least, feel free to invite your friends to join us. There's a share button at the top that makes it really easy to do that. But with all that said, Marty, Liz, Lou, I'll turn things over to you now.
Thanks there, Will. You are the sunshine of my life, just so you know that. Hi, everyone. My name is Cecilia Superstition. Hi, everybody. Martin Duffy. Former senior master of whiskey, a lot of little masters of whiskey under me, behind me, far back, with Diageo for about 14 years, 18 glorious months as the national brand ambassador for Benedictine French liqueur. Yeah, don't get too excited, Lou. Lou gets very excited about that. And then 8 years as co-producer of Chicago Independent Spirit Expo for the last nearly 7 years. Oh my God, I get so old. The time. I'm the sole brand representative for Glencairn Crystal in all of North America. And maybe, who knows, I might work my way down into South America. like a killer bee, except going the opposite direction. Since everyone here has been a writer or author, I just want to mention that I rewrote the Bible. Spicing up the whole Adam and Eve. Hot now, very hot. And when Jesus resurrects Lazarus, he's a flesh-eating zombie. So buy it
on Amazon.
On Amazon.
I'm sure there is one.
Yeah. Boom. Look for the King Marty version.
Talk about your evil friendship.
Evil friendship. A pop-up version. There's a pop-up version.
Not to move on from that, but hey, everyone. I'm Liz Rhoades, technical distiller and spirit consultant. Spent just over a decade of experience across the alcoholic beverage industry, including a variety of substrates and spirits, so beer, rum, vodka, but my particular favorite and expertise is, of course, in whiskey. Yay. That was a sad yay for me.
Jazz hands?
We're on a golf course.
Yeah. Whiskey.
Spent most of my career at a small outfit known as Diageo, but now I'm currently founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting. And hey, want to learn more about that? If you scroll down to the About the Host section, there's actually a link to my website. So give it a click, check it out. Lou?
Thanks, Liz. I'm Lou Bryson. I'm a whiskey writer. I was the managing editor at Whiskey Advocate magazine for 20 years. And then left and went out on my own again, and I'm currently plugging my latest book, Whiskey Masterclass, and wouldn't want you to forget the original classic tasting whiskey. That's what I do. I am the oh, there he is. Good man.
Who doesn't have a copy of this book by now?
Not enough people. There's still a couple million in the world that haven't. I am currently a senior drinks writer for the Daily Beast, the award-winning half-full food and drink section of the Daily Beast. And my whiskey today is Courage and Conviction from Virginia Distilling, an American single malt. So, cheers. Marty, roll on, brother.
Woohoo! Thank you, Lewis. This week's guest, what can we say about him? Really nothing.
Okay. See ya.
No, this man, I have a whole thing prepared because it was too much to remember. He's co-founder and distiller at Kings County Distillery, New York's premier craft distillery. Born and raised in rural Kentucky, so he has a long white coat and a frock coat and a white hat somewhere, walking stick. Colin started distilling moonshine in Brooklyn, which I think is illegal as a hobby. Went legitimate in 2010, founding Kings County with David Haskell.
Sure, boy.
First drops right there.
The American Distilling Institute, the American Craft Spirits Association, San Francisco World Spirits Competition. All these folks, New York Times, New Yorker, Whiskey Advocate, have all just thrown accolades and rose petals at him. He is also, so he's not only a distiller, but he's a author, a writer, historian, whiskey historian. He has written such books as this long title.
Come on.
Oh, I thought it was just a real long title. I'm sorry. There it is. Yes, Dead Distillers, one of my favorite books. It's about cannibal distillers, and of course a book on moonshining. Mr. Colin Spoelman, everybody.
There it is.
Hello there, Colin.
Better, Liz. Yay!
Woo,
Thank you, Marty.
Probably one of my longest introductions, actually. I think.
Yeah, he usually doesn't write stuff down. He just makes it up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So this,
Yale graduate. I want to throw that in there because he looks like he's been out of work for the last 5 years. So I want to make sure that people know he's educated.
Right.
Colin, we always do this, start things off just to get an idea of your journey. How'd you get from just a poor boy with a fishing pole down by the old cement pond, fishing, no shoes, little straw hat down in Kentucky, made your way all the way up to the big city, going to Yale, getting some education, and then becoming a big distiller in New York?
Yeah.
you don't have to give us the whole thing if you don't want to.
I mean, they are very related.
You're gonna do that.
Okay. All right.
So I grew up in not really bourbon part of Kentucky, but the moonshine part of Kentucky, which, if you're from Kentucky, is a big deal. So I kind of, it was a dry county. There was no particular culture of going to bars or going to, there were no liquor stores, no bars. There weren't even a whole lot of restaurants in Harlan County because people don't really go out if they can't drink with dinner, as it turns out. So when I moved up to New York, very different experience with alcohol, and people's homes in New York City are so small that they don't really entertain. And so that's why New York City has such a great nightlife restaurant culture. So kind of the total opposite of everything that I'd come from. And also there was sort of this farm to table thing happening where people were getting interested in things that were made at a smaller scale to an older tradition. And so there was kind of this, and I was bringing moonshine back from Kentucky, not necessarily, when I went to the bootlegger, I would get, Zima. That was the beverage of choice in the early 90s from the bootlegger. So the bootlegger was just somebody who would buy commercial alcohol, Zima, Mad Dog, Kessler, sort of whatever high school kids and alcoholics were drinking.
Were there different levels of bootlegger? Did you go to a different bootlegger for the better booze, or did nobody really go to a bootlegger for better booze?
Well, there were different levels of visibility. So as a high school student, I was relegated to a
more obvious.
Well, no, the opposite. I had to go to the more surreptitious bootleggers.
Oh, that's right.
But there was Mag Bailey, who was the sort of, just like everybody knew Mag Bailey, and I think she died at 101 years old and had been bootlegging since her 20s. So she started during the Depression and continued her entire life in Harlan, Kentucky, selling mostly, again, commercial alcohol, not necessarily moonshine, but you could find moonshine, and it was. I came to understand this was my cultural inheritance as a Kentuckian, both bourbon and moonshine, and people would ask me about it, and I literally knew nothing about either one, but became genuinely curious through people's enthusiasm for it. And so first started bringing moonshine from Kentucky back to Brooklyn and just sharing it with people. And then that got me thinking, well, there's probably a way to homebrew moonshine. And so got a still off the internet and started sort of puttering around in my apartment, which, yes, is illegal. Though I think New York City might be one of the safer places to be a moonshiner.
Because there's so much other shit going on, is that? Moonshine. Yeah, I had other priorities.
Right, exactly. Whereas, in rural Virginia, people are like, "Oh, moonshine, how evil," So I, started puttering around with a still, not with the intention really of starting a craft distillery, but after a couple of years of playing around with this sort of hobby, sort of small business, small illegal business, looked into getting a license, and lo and behold, New York State had just adjusted its laws around distilling, and then even, in fact, by the time we were applying in 2009, they had just passed the farm distillery law in New York, which made it even more appealing to start a distillery in New York.
Brilliant legislation.
Yeah. So put in for our license 2009, then got our license in 2010. So we are just had our 11-year anniversary, which makes us not amongst the pioneers of craft distilling, but certainly among kind of the early players. And in the world of whiskey, so much of your credibility is based on the age of your whiskey. And so I think it has taken us a while to get to the point. And I should say from the outset that as a distiller, my intent was always to distill the whiskey that we sold. So that took time to get first it was a 1-year bourbon, then it was a 2-year bourbon. Now, almost without exception, all of our whiskeys at least 3 years old. And we have whiskeys as old as 7 years that we've released. And then I would say if we've done anything since the sort of moonshine days, New York exists as this melting pot of cultures from around the world. And we have understood that our legacy is not necessarily to replicate Kentucky bourbon in Brooklyn, but to say, how can we borrow from Scotch whiskey or Irish whiskey or even Appalachian moonshine to make whiskeys that appeal to ultimately our home audience, the sort of New York culinary community, and hoping that if we can, the old saying is, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. I definitely don't think that applies to whiskey, but I'm hoping that at least if we can find an audience in New York, we'll be able to find an audience in other places. And so that has more or less played out. We're in 20 states and 5 countries. Mm-hmm. And have, we're in our sort of adolescence as a business, and I think have transitioned from being sort of unaged whiskey focused to more age focused, larger barrels, playing around with different creative ingredients. So our peated bourbon is a great example of kind of mixing an American with a Scottish stylistic approach. So really using the entire world of whiskey to generate things that American whiskey has never seen, and hoping to expand the category of American whiskey, which I would argue has been very homogenous and a little bit, I won't say boring, but just very, there hasn't been a lot of difference involved until, let's say, the last 15 years. I mean, in the 80s, when there were 12 distilleries in the United States and not a lot of variety, I think we are about to explode into a moment where there is more supply than demand, And I think that is a great moment for consumers. I don't know if it's definitely not a great moment for distillers, but the degree to which people have been putting whiskey away relative to the pace at which people are discovering whiskey may create this wonderful moment where there's so much variety and so much creativity in American whiskey all around the country, not just from what historically was Kentucky and Tennessee. That's a really exciting thing to be a part of as a distiller, but also to watch as a sort of consumer, I guess.
Yeah. So I had a question, just going back to right target audience. When you started to kind of bring some of that moonshine up and let people sort of experience that, what was the feedback and how did that fuel into, the business venture and fuel that whole ideation or innovation process initially?
Well, I most of the stuff that I brought up from Kentucky was pretty low grade. It was high proof and low grade. But people were still enthusiastic about it. And when I started to distill myself, I was after that. I was after high proof, low grade.
Okay.
But the audience was kind of like enthusiastic, but also kind of like, what would you do to make it taste good? Was a question I got a lot. And I felt, genuinely challenged by that question. And so set about making a high quality unaged whiskey, which, if you think about it, most whiskey consumers would say that is an oxymoron. How could you have a high quality unaged whiskey? But obviously, as a distiller, it is your job first to create a high quality unaged whiskey and then assume that everything that you age from there will be good. So I think that helped understand sort of a fundamental, sort of business concept or premise from which we began, which was, let's just make good moonshine. And if people gravitate or catch on to that or appreciate that, then we'll release a 1-year bourbon and then a 2-year bourbon and now a 3-year flagship bourbon. And just sort of assuming that if you get the basics right, everything else from that will come. And I actually believe this is common to a lot of craft producers, which is that they're spending a lot more on the distillation side, which maybe lowers the threshold of the aging process. Whereas Kentucky, they make pretty inexpensive distillate that they age very well. And so there's kind of the craft approach and the commercial approach, which often end up in fairly similar places. But speaking only for our own production, it's been, let's make very narrow cuts on the stills. Let's use all organic ingredients as much as possible, sourced from local farmers. Let's use a variety of cooperage strategies as opposed to just the 53-gallon barrel, char number 4. Yeah.
Well, I have 2 questions for you, Colin. They both kind of pertain to this. First off, your distillery is in the Navy Yards of Brooklyn. Who the heck thinks of, I'm going to build myself a distillery and let me put it where they build ships.
Right.
And then, because your distillery and your whiskey's aging, maturing in the largest metropolitan area in North America, how do you think that affects your whiskey as opposed to like the guys down in Kentucky where you go to these rural distilleries and rural rick houses? I'm always curious about the urban distillers and how their whiskey might be aging.
Right. We started first in Williamsburg in this little 1-room studio, and we outgrew that pretty quickly. So we were almost going to sign a lease just sort of on a dumb kind of warehouse building, in the depths of Brooklyn. And the Navy Yard approached us and said, we're looking for food and beverage tenants because that's a segment of manufacturing that's difficult to outsource to other countries. So we think this is a sort of permanent, and the Navy Yard, I should say, is owned by the city of New York. So they're kind of a incubator for manufacturing businesses. So it's a little bit different than just a commercial landlord, especially in New York City, where commercial landlords are, I'll be kind, but yeah. So But the Navy Yard approached us and said, do you want to start your business here? And they offered us these beautiful 125-year-old buildings. And it just seemed like a no-brainer. And furthermore, there's so much history in that part of Brooklyn as it relates to distilling. The whiskey wars of Brooklyn were fought in Vinegar Hill, which is the neighborhood adjacent to the Navy Yard and was kind of the distillery district back in the 1850s. So to be able to kind of tie into that history in terms of our tours and storytelling helps people remember that distilling is more than just Kentucky and Tennessee, or at least was historically before Prohibition. And then it's just in the last 80 years that we've really focused on Kentucky and Tennessee. So that's part one of your question. Part two of your question, I think it will remain to be seen over the long term how the whiskey ages. We have a number of different warehouse environments. So right now, most of our stuff is aging in a brick windowless warehouse that does not see a whole lot of temperature fluctuation. Yeah. That is helping us get our age statements up. I don't know that that's helping us turn over product. So there is a push-pull, obviously, with every whiskey distillery. You want to have high age statements and appeal to that consumer, but you also have to release whiskey. So we release about 10% of the warehouse every year. So for every bottle that we sell, we have 10 bottles that are at some point in the aging process.
And you mentioned too that you've explored different sizes of so that's I'm sure of course will always have an impact as well.
Yeah, different sizes, new fill, second fill, playing around with some finishing. It's less our business than somebody like Angel's Envy, who has really built their business on finished whiskey. But I think for us, the fun of being a distiller is to use all the tools that a distiller has. And that goes from sourcing ingredients to mashing, fermenting, distilling, aging, finishing. Blending is very important to our business, all the way out through packaging, I guess you could even say. So being able to be creative with each of those steps and to have people who are not just me, but have people who are in charge of just cooperage management or just blending or just distilling, you can sort of draw on their sort of ideas and creativity. Certainly the hope is to have things that are different from what's been in the market for years and years and years.
Speaking of packaging, have you moved at all from you have like 3.75?
This is our 750 bottle.
There it goes.
Damn, that's a handful.
Yeah, this
is
like it's got the DSP number there on the front.
Nice.
Look at that.
Brooklyn on the back.
Very nice.
It was actually very hard to find a stock bottle. So we ended up commissioning a fully custom bottle. Even we commissioned this fully custom cap, which is designed absolutely to look like a stock cap that matches our other caps. So a lot of effort goes into looking totally banal and plain and
minimalistic. Yeah.
Well, to put the focus.
Look at that thing. You got to have like a canteen cover for it.
Yeah.
Like a canvas thing you can slip in and snap shut and hook on your belt and walk around town and booze.
What we sell the majority of has always been this.
The hip
sure, just right in the pocket.
So that is what we started with, the 200 milliliter, and then moved to the 375s. And just in the last 2 years, we've been doing the 750 bottles. And that has accelerated the business for sure.
That's gone over well?
Yeah. As it turns out, people, if you can offer them a bigger bottle. The funny thing is we didn't get it because we were in New York and everybody shops on foot. So the smaller format bottles are actually preferable to people. Whereas if you're shopping with a car, if you have a parking lot, people want to get the bigger bottle and the best value for the thing. Sure. So that took us a little while to catch on to this sort of broader audience. But so be it. We also didn't have a whole lot of inventory to be able to put into the larger format. So
sure, smaller bottle goes farther.
Yeah. Plus, the hip flasks are smart for tourists.
Yeah, I mean, we
are
really
packing and luggage and stuff.
The number of people who have now gravitated to the 375 size because of not just us, but other craft distillers kind of leading with that size because of price and availability, I think, has created, again, a little just more points of entry. Not everybody wants to spend $70 to $100 on a bottle of 3-year-old bourbon or rye. So I understand that. So let's give people the opportunity to try it for $23 or, a $40 375. And so most people prefer that. Some people are like, you're cheating me. Just give me the bigger bottle. So you gotta.
They will always be with us,
everybody.
those people.
Yeah. So.
And has that changed? I mean, just looking back, right, over the past year, right, COVID, has that size format changed? I mean, just again, with kind of probably not really being open to the public, but people are able to, just pick up items. Like, has that size format really, changed?
Well, it was a great blessing that we had the 200 ml because all of a sudden we could ship these smaller format bottles as a tasting kit and then do a tasting over Zoom. And I don't know how many of those we've done, but it was a lot. And I would guess we've shipped somewhere on the order of 5,000 little kits of 3-bottle or 5-bottle sets. And we've done corporate tastings, and they're great because people, they're shut inside and they want the experience of drinking with their colleagues or with their friends. And we were able to do that mostly because we had the glass in stock. And if we had to conceive of the package, source the glass, source the caps, all of that during the pandemic, I don't think we would have gotten over the finish line. But also just the past 3 months, I will say thank you to anybody who's bought a bottle of Kings County in the last 3 months, because people are drinking at home, but they're spending more and they're getting, adventurous. And so that's helped us quite a bit. For a rough early start. I mean, sanitizer, was not my favorite moment in the company's history. But it did solve a few problems, and not just our problems, but the FedEx guys' problems when he didn't have any. So it's been great to have to finally see people kind of discovering the whiskey and buying it in great quantity relative to what I'm used to, which is always kind of hustling to justify our existence.
Well, an interesting thing with the hand sanitizers, I saw a number of guys who, and this is the thing with whiskey lovers, they were collecting the various distillery hand sanitizers. It's like, ooh, vintage.
Well,
vintage King County hand sanitizer.
We ended up on some best of hand sanitizer list, and there was a day when we sold.
Of course, there was.
And we put it on our website on a pay what you wish basis. And there was some day when I think we sold, I won't say the number, but it was an enormous amount of hand sanitizer through that channel, just because it was like, people had nothing to do and they were like, well, I'm going to buy the best hand sanitizer. But of course there were people who were like, it doesn't have the gel. People were very Purell oriented at the time.
Right.
And so we're very dismissive of it was best of until they got the bottle in their house, and they were like, what did I pay for this? I was like, well, it was pay what you wish. So
I want to make it my mission to remind everybody that the distilling business came through when we needed it.
Yeah. Yes.
Because I think people have already forgotten that.
Yeah, and brewery business too. We actually distilled. We stopped.
Yeah.
We stopped mashing at a certain point because there was so much beer coming in through kegs that were going out of code, and we distilled beer from all 5 boroughs, distributed to all 5 boroughs through the brewery. So you gave us a keg, we'd give you half of the sanitizer that came from it for your own distribution, and got a lot of product to people that way, both fans of the brewery, but also just essential workers that they wanted to support. So it wasn't just our view of who needed to have sanitizer, but more of a community, which was great.
Yeah.
Was there other collaborations that came out of that outside of hand sanitizer, in terms of, I don't know, like a special release later down the road, or?
Foolishly, we did not save any of that beer to be whiskey. Maybe we have like 1 or 2 barrels, but we should have. But I was pretty keen once the sanitizer kind of got around to the world to get back to whiskey. So I, got us back on the bourbon mashing, I think probably around beginning of June. So it came and it went, and it would have been smart to lay down some whiskey for the long term, and some other distilleries did that instead of making sanitizer. But we didn't, so we'll see.
But at least it was for a good cause, like to your point.
Right.
So
yeah, and I think some of those bottles will end up in museum collections as a marker of what people were doing during the pandemic. And let's be honest, New York specifically, it was more serious in New York than in other places in the beginning. Yeah. And so I think that was meaningful for us as a distillery to be able to kind of
contribute,
lead for our community, which the whole rest of the country was a little bit, looking to for like, how serious do we take this? And we chose to take it seriously and to, step up.
Yeah, I've kind of been using mine as fire starter.
Yeah.
I mean, now that there's a ready supply of it, I'm just like, I got all these bottles because I wanted to, help out. And
I just use
it works.
Body wash.
Works well.
Yeah, body wash.
And using it on my cat's toes.
I was just going to say, I actually moved to the New York City metro area in May. Early
Okay. Yeah.
So I think when I arrived, a lot of people were like, "Why are you? Why are you?
Why are you moving here?"
Right.
But I will say, I guess, I somewhat, fortunate because I wasn't, there at the early beginning.
Right.
And I think moving here, it was sort of like a very strange time. Because I'd traveled out here before when everything was open, but it was sort of surreal in a way. But I guess appreciate kind of your contributions and what other folks did to kind of get us back up and running at least safely. So thanks.
New York at a crisis is New York at its best, for sure. And I don't know, there's plenty of crises that have gone on, but everybody sort of takes a minute, decides not to be an asshole, and it's a beautiful thing. So
I love that they have to think about it.
Yeah. Right.
Look how you guys handled that giant ape climbing the Empire State.
Yeah.
That was, you guys handled that pretty well. Didn't have to kill the ape, but still pretty well.
I've been holding the question back because I've been waiting for a moment to get in. So this is going to be going back a piece.
Sure.
You said you mentioned that you used some used barrels.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all for single malt, or is it in other things?
Thus far, it's only for it's in terms of what whiskeys we released. It's for single malt. We do have some corn whiskey that we are sitting on, and I'm very excited about that. In particular, another thing that we just came out with this year was an Irish style whiskey, which is kind of a no-brainer with New York City's Irish American history. And I got to lead a class on Irish whiskey history, which was really fun to dig into and to try to say which of Irish whiskey's sort of heritage should we appropriate for our New York City Irish style whiskey. And one of the great things about Irish whiskey, it's a little bit lighter in profile. People aren't chasing the age statements in the way that they are with Scotch, or even now, unfortunately, American whiskey. So to be able to come up with something that's lighter by design, I think is kind of a cool opportunity. And corn whiskey I've always loved, both its unaged version and now hopefully we'll at some point see a kind of a less expensive, hopefully, entry into Kings County.
Well, with that,
So
Colin,
it kind of leads into my follow-up and kind of doesn't, which makes it actually more interesting because for the corn whiskey, I mean, used barrels, not a problem. You just go ahead and label it. But, I mean, TTB regs are kind of weird about used barrels in other kinds of whiskey. So how do you handle the labeling, and do people notice, and or is it a non-issue?
I mean, we don't know yet. Fortunately,
Okay.
we have the blessing of not having to deal with that until we release it. But I mean, if we take a teaspoon of bourbon and pour it in the tank, we can't call it corn whiskey. Oh no, we have to just call it whiskey. It's a becomes a sort of blend of whiskeys. So that may be a choice. I don't know if corn whiskey is the most marketable whiskey style, but if we just called it whiskey, I think people would be into that, or New York whiskey or some.
See, this is the thing. This is essentially my theory that I keep fiddling with and not going anywhere with because I don't know how to make an interesting story out of it. Is that it doesn't freaking matter,
right?
As long as you can put whiskey on the label, 95% of people don't give a shit.
Right. Well, and bourbon has been what people have been looking for so long, and that has its set of rules. But now people are becoming more adventurous and interested in what else American whiskey has to offer. So, again, going back to, I feel like my charge as a non-Kentucky distiller is to figure out what can we do as New York distillers that's meaningful, that's beyond Kentucky bourbon. And corn whiskeys are just a great opportunity in American whiskey, both in terms of its flavor profile. That's, again, you get this nice sort of creamy, lighter bodied vanilla. I mean, corn whiskey when done well is fantastic. So, and Balcones, for example, makes a great corn whiskey. I look to something like that and say, this should be, more people should get to try this and get to love this.
Well, that's like some of those really good aged light whiskeys people are releasing now. Schmear's got one out, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had always just like, light whiskey.
Right. Yeah.
And turns out you get a little bit of age on it. It's pretty damn good.
Yeah. People are ready to get outside the box. I mean, they're frustrated with the commercial world of bourbon for sure. And when you can't get what you want,
I'm frustrated yet.
Well, maybe not you.
I'll keep drinking some of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you actually are in the business of blind tasting and actually paying attention to what whiskey tastes like, my God, what a beautiful time to be in even Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah.
And if you're the kind of person who wants to put on your Instagram that you found a bottle of Weller Special Reserve, which is the least special American whiskey that is currently gaining the most attention. I mean, yes, there are, that's my example of sort of overhyped bourbon. But
all it takes is one award or one big article nowadays.
Or one Fred.
Right.
One Fred.
One Fred. That's all it takes.
One Fred.
Yeah. Liz,
I really like it.
Colin, I've ripped open the door for you if you want to jump in there on what
we
we're talking about. Okay, go ahead.
I got your lead there. So, I think, you're right. Diversification of the liquid. I'm sorry, I'm saying liquid, Lou. Of the whiskeys available. I think it's just a really great time to be a distiller. And I think one of the things that I wanted to dig in, of course, about expanding the categories is about the Empire Rye Project and what you guys are doing around that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, but maybe before I do, I'll just sort of flag for anybody who has does not have this book. Maybe you've seen this online.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is the family tree of bourbon whiskey, which nobody really knows this, but it was first published in this book. And this is how I came. Yeah. This is how I came.
Just say, Diageo had a copy of that map in one of the labs, and I did not know that came originally from your book. So well done. I will call that out.
I'm glad I had the opportunity.
So that's weird too. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I'll send you.
But you just read a bunch of begats all over it, right?
Bourbon begat this, and more whiskey begat bourbon.
Yeah, bourbon begets a lot for sure.
Yep.
So that was just not necessarily trying to do anything other than organize the world of commercial bourbon and corporate owners. And, there was this sort of myth of small family run businesses that was running American bourbon. But in fact, it was, British companies and Japanese companies and global conglomerates of which American whiskey was a part of a huge portfolio. And to be able to sort of understand that world helped us to define ourselves, not even necessarily in opposition to that, but more our competition in the marketplace was sourced whiskey. So it was people who were buying whiskey from MGP or Dickel or Buffalo Trace even, and then labeling it Brooklyn whiskey. So to be able to kind of both identify what I thought was credible whiskey, which was, when you know who the distiller is, that means a lot more to me than something that is not allowed to disclose who the distiller is. So to be able to kind of articulate what I liked about the world of commercial bourbon then helped me sort of articulate a vision for, what we wanted to be, not in opposition to commercial bourbon, but to get to be differentiated from commercial bourbon for sure. And so Empire Rye was a project that was started by Nicole Austin and a group of other New York distillers. And the idea, which I was very dismissive of at first, was to just make rye whiskey in New York. I mean, it was straight rye whiskey, distilled from New York rye, 75% in the mash bill. So high rye content, grown in New York, distilled in New York. You could call yourself Empire Rye. And I just thought, well, it's just rye whiskey made in New York. What differentiates that? But what I didn't realize was that Jack Daniel does the same thing. I mean, Jack Daniel's is bourbon made in Tennessee. And just by calling it Tennessee whiskey, somehow it means something totally different to anybody who drinks Tennessee whiskey. And, to be able to, people do invest a lot in geography. I mean, Champagne, cognac, these are things that exist. So because of an international culture that puts that foregrounds geography as the determinant of a whiskey's sort of meaning, Empire Rye has been wildly successful as a project. And it was only 3 years after we started laying down the whiskey, and it came time to release it with the other New York distillers. And we just had so much fun because we are all really small on our own, but together we do amount to something. So to be able to kind of be in league with, what are otherwise in a way competition for us, helped us to kind of, again, sort of articulate who we collectively want to be, not just who we individually want to be. And that's been a really great project. And the rye whiskey is really fantastic. If anybody is a fan of rye whiskey, so much of the commercial rye is, it's got a lot of corn content. It was distilled on a column still. We always use pot stills and, just get a much more viscous, estery, oilier distillate from rye whiskey that's just really great. And not even, other New York distillers are doing the same thing. So to be able to kind of take the history of rye whiskey and kind of carve it back from what it's become is a great opportunity, not just for us, but other New York distillers.
Plus Empire Rye, that's a good name.
It is a good name, yeah.
Rye. No, you can't call it Lincoln Rye. That's Illinois.
Yeah.
Or Ill Rye. It just doesn't go. Empire Rye, it's a cool name.
Yeah, it does have a ring to it. But I was just going to also comment, and I think it goes back to what you said. You mentioned champagne or whatever, but I think the other piece to that is varietals. A lot of different rye varietals, and some that will grow well in North Dakota, some may not grow well in North Dakota, but they will grow well in New York State, or maybe even different in upper New York.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing too, which is so exciting. I don't know if the consumer gets to understand that as much as there's exposure, right, more in champagne and cognac, for example. And I know that's part of the whole terroir conversation that we're having as an industry, not to go down that rabbit hole today.
Uh-huh.
But I think that's another, key piece to it. And it's not necessarily just, hey, we're New York. It's, there's a lot of other, facets that go into that makes, a unique product at the end of the day. Yeah.
And I think that conversation of terroir, or whatever it is both, it's both agricultural and it's both tradition, and tradition forged out of ultimately competitors. When you're in a region with other vintners or other distillers, you may choose to create. Sorry, that's my child.
I was trying to guess. I'm wondering which one of the four of us.
I'm really excited about rye, right?
I can't mute him, unfortunately.
I'm going to check my front room.
Yeah, my life would be so much better if I could. But anyway, it's just, I think that that interesting thing that's developing, actually, it's going around the country. So if you look at the Pacific Northwest, you see people gravitating to kind of brewer-oriented single malts.
Yeah.
You go to Texas, you've got a very specific aging climate there. People are really into barbecue, really into smoked whiskeys. You see all the mesquite smoke and various different treatments, both to the grain and to the really intense aging process. If the Northeast becomes a rye region, maybe that's a way that we can sort of carve our place that's outside of bourbon, because there is going to be a point in American whiskey culture where people don't just order a commercially produced bourbon from a big airport brand. And what the landscape looks like, I think is something that's fun to sort of both imagine and then try to execute.
Well, there's an awful lot of people nowadays moving away from the whole brand loyalty, which is what I think a lot of the big guys depend upon, and going towards just having a buttload of whiskey. I mean, you see some whiskey collections, especially online, and some of these whiskey groups. Some guy will show what he just bought at the store that day, and it'll be 12 different bottles of whiskey from both little and small guys, because he does want to try them all. And it's just, I think it's great for the little guys.
I'm seeing more of it at bars too.
Oh, you got
it.
Bars
the
are
whiskey library type of bar, is a relatively recent concept, and it's different from a cocktail bar. And so it's more about storytelling and knowledge of the whiskeys themselves, as opposed to turning them into something. So that too, I think, is all sort of feeding into ultimately what boils down to an interest in knowledge, understanding the why people are doing what they're doing, what differentiates one thing from another. I mean, it's a pretty significant rabbit hole that somebody can go down and devote a lot of their fortune to building these elaborate home bars. But that's great for us, hopefully.
But with the whiskey bars, I've found you go to them and they have this massive selection as well. it was pointed out to me once in New York. I brought a friend of mine to this one bar that had 40 tap handles.
Mhm.
It says, I'm not drinking beer here. I go, why? And he goes, well, there's 40 tap handles. They haven't gone through a keg in probably 2 weeks.
It's going to be a pretty damn big bar to handle that many taps.
Yeah, well, then there really were 40 tap handles. It was enormous. And then, the same thing has happened at some of these bars where they'll have a variety of different whiskeys. I went with a distiller to one bar here in Chicago. We saw his whiskey, and he remembered he hadn't been available in Chicago for 5 years. There was an open bottle in the back bar.
Yeah.
Looked at it, and the sun had been shining on it all that time. So it looked like a bottle of Chablis. Yeah. Tastes a little like a wood-scented water.
Yeah.
Going out drinking with Hansel, a lot of times he only wanted to have a bottle that would have like that much out of it and no more.
And
one that was sitting there. Yeah.
Neck pour. You got to get the neck pour.
Oh my God, the neck. Sorry. I gotta do a piece on the neck pour. I gotta do that.
You do.
Oh my God.
Colin, I want to go back to your Irish style whiskey. Obviously, I can't call it Irish whiskey, but your connection, your whole idea of connecting it to, the Irish connection to New York, the gangs of New York. Hello. And since you are a historian, did you do any research into were there whiskeys being made by Irish immigrants? And if so, what were they doing in New York? Because that would be kind of a cool thing.
I'm guessing they were being sold and drunk. Just a guess.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I think it would have been something like molasses based. Yeah, so not even really whiskey. What was called whiskey?
So Indian whiskey.
Yeah. Most of those distillers in the urban distillers were really looking for a
quick fix.
They were looking for the dollars and the expediency. So I don't know that there was anything that I found that was worth necessarily resuscitating from that history. But obviously, Irish whiskey's own tradition has been well preserved. And I don't think if there were distillers that were aiming at a sort of more elevated type of whiskey, that it would have been that different from what's currently being, pot still, green barley or green rye.
How do you go about, making the connection for the consumer? I mean, for something like that, it says single malt whiskey on it, and that for a lot of people just beep, Scotch. But how do you let people know that it's an Irish inspired whiskey?
I think
I assume the TTB is going to be a little.
There's whiskeys that if you put Irish style.
That's what we did. We said Irish style whiskey, American whiskey.
And they went for that?
Because Emerald
went for it. I mean,
okay.
I don't know.
Well,
there's the question of what passes
Pilsner, right?
The TTB reviewer, and there's the question of what passes legitimate legal. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're sort of in the gray area there, but I got an unaged rye whiskey passed through TTB, which theoretically should not be possible to exist, but. Irish style American
whiskey, you get that day.
I don't think we're tricking anybody. So, it's that's what we've done. And we did both all malted barley, and then we did one this past year. We distilled this past year 51% green malt, so to speak, green barley, and then 49% malted barley, triple distilled, and then aged in our own used cooperage. And it's a pretty cool whiskey. It's light, obviously, but and it's this was our first year of having any aged whiskey from it. So stay tuned on this project. But
is it twice or 3 times distilled? Did you make
triple distilled? Yeah.
Aged minimum of 3 years. I mean, did you kind of go that?
Well, we put out the first year. We laid down several barrels, and then we're going to release them sort of as we grow into the project, just to bring people along. In fact, we came out with a poachine first, which is an Irish moonshine. And that was really fun because we've done a white rye, we've done a corn moonshine, and then now an all barley moonshine. So to be able to taste the different distillates, that's a really fun thing. And I think when people come to us to visit the distillery, they're not just necessarily there to try great whiskey. They want to get a little under the hood and understand the distillate and where it's going. And obviously we're very proud of our 7-year-old whiskey, but we're just as proud of the Pochine, which I think flexes a different sort of talent and ambition from a distiller.
Let's talk about your peated bourbon, because I know others are doing that, and I've tasted mesquite flavor, but I thought peat is, obviously connected to the Scots, a little Irish, but a peated bourbon was different.
Yes,
as far as ideas go.
And the idea came because we were making a single malt. We had heard that American single malt was the next big thing. And I felt like a lot of the American single malt was, especially the ones that were smoked, were pretty heavy handed. So I thought if we did something that was very lightly peated, just sort of aiming more at a Scotch drinker than a bourbon drinker wanting to have an American style single malt, that would be our approach. So we were constantly laying that down, and years were going by because it has to age. It doesn't have to age, but we wanted it to age longer. But in the interim, we were making bourbon, and we ran out of the regular Golden Promise English malt that we use for the regular bourbon. And then lo and behold, there was the peated sitting on the floor for the single malt. So Rob was like, I can go home, or I can make peated bourbon. And I said, well, make the peated bourbon. Let's not waste a production day because I forgot to order the right malt. So, a year later, we tried it. And because of peated bourbon, people were sort of set up to maybe understand it and appreciate it. And it is good. I mean, it is still it's a staff favorite. It's one whiskey that I constantly am drawn to within our whiskeys. A lot of complexity on the finish. It's a way to make what is a young bourbon taste, with some complexity, some intrigue. And we've been doing, that's been out now for about 8 years, and it is our second most popular whiskey after straight bourbon whiskey.
So as far as, I guess not numbers, but just intelligence about sales and such, do you have any kind of grip on how most people are drinking your whiskey? Because I know that, Jack Daniels, for instance, often has said that like 3/4 of what's being drunk is being drunk as a +1.
Right. I think, in terms of our distribution beyond New York City, I think that's mostly the sort of neat home drinker who knows and is chasing after a neat whiskey pour.
Yeah.
But within New York, we're more commonly available, and you have more varieties of our whiskeys. And we do have some unaged whiskeys. We have a grapefruit jalapeno moonshine. We have some spiced whiskey that's sort of like spiced rum. So things that are kind of aimed to be, we have a chocolate whiskey that's more for mixing, but we aren't able to produce it cheaply enough to really make it a cocktail ingredient even amongst the cocktail bars of New York City. It's been a very tough to crack that world because we're just so expensive.
Talk to Mr. Benedictine about that shit.
Yeah.
I can give you a couple pointers on that if you want.
Okay. No, it's tough to sell something that is maybe best suited to a cocktail that then is so expensive you can't make a cocktail.
Yeah. To be honest, the thing that really popped the question was the 200 milliliter bottles.
Yeah, right. Well, that's also been a huge hindrance for the on-premise scene.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just thinking that, if somebody picks one of those up, the natural reaction is burn.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
For you, Lou.
Yeah, it is.
It's a kind of a Pavlovian experience for Lou.
A small bottle. I shall drink it. Yeah, pretty much.
A good cocktail.
Never give Lou little bottles of penicillin. because he automatically, oh my God, it's small.
Right. And I'll say also, we do have our tasting room in the gatehouses that has opened my own eyes a little bit to cocktails.
Cocktails,
the first to concede, I was mostly a straight whiskey drinker until opening up the gatehouse, and now I'm, I've got vermouth in the fridge right now.
Have you heard that the famous Stonewall Jackson thing? I had whiskey once and never drank it again because I liked it so much.
Oh no, I've never heard that quote.
That's me in cocktails. I stay away from cocktails because I just go, boy, that's good. I will have another.
Well, I think for me the prohibition is don't make any cocktails at home because that's the beginning of the end.
Yes.
Let a professional do it.
But actually, taking a bottle that say it's a little prohibitive if you had it behind a bar to make a cocktail of some spirits because the cost is high, and therefore the cost of that cocktail. There's a local distillery that has a $70 gin. That freaking martini is going to cost that bar an arm and leg to charge. So, but if you take it home, and you don't feel as bad about making yourself a nice deluxe martini.
I don't feel bad at all.
Yeah, well, of course, Lou would. In fact, Lou would feel really good in about an hour or so.
No cost calculations at home.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, people also are, sort of why I like an era where people are focused on quality as opposed to cost. That's good for my business. Whether they're making cocktails or whether they're drinking straight whiskey or anything. So I certainly welcome that from consumers, and I can't wait till the farm to table restaurant actually decides, let's actually go actually look into who produces this stuff and get something that's genuinely made from farm grown grain. Not that, I guess it all comes from a farm one way or another, but
you know what?
the number of farm to table restaurants serving, MGP in some form or another, nothing wrong with that, but it's a little disappointing to somebody who does spend a lot of time laboring over the product and trying to make it different, in a transparent, authentic, different way. That's just my heart sinks a little bit to see that sort of thing.
Well, Colin, is there a bit of a distillery trail, especially in Brooklyn?
Brooklyn, I mean, we have great distilleries in Brooklyn, and obviously a great bar and restaurant culture. So when people come to New York, they're going out. And New York Distilling Company and Van Brunt Stillhouse, we just did an event on Empire Rye with sort of an urban Empire Rye event with those guys. That was a lot of fun. And
an angel got its wings.
And obviously, even if you go a little outside the city, upstate New York, that's where the sort of the history of distilling in New York, the recent history of craft distilling has come from. So it's a great place to visit for beer, for whiskey,
Brooklyn's so much fun.
Yeah.
I was going to say, speaking of visiting, so are you now back open to the public?
So we are. We just restarted tours. Oh. They're limited to 8 people. Everybody's spread out. But early feedback is that it sort of works. And our tasting room is open for indoor dining. Not that we serve any food. So when I say dining,
every drink is a meal.
Yes.
Liquid dining.
We have Cuomo chips. You can have Cuomo chips. But so we're open every day except Monday. And you can come have a cocktail, come have flights. We do some tasting classes on Wednesday nights. We're about to add Friday nights. So we do have a lot going on over at the distillery, and like to keep on the connected through education, through tours, through classes. That's a lot of fun.
Good. Well, I am fully vaccinated as of next Friday, so
I'm ready to roll.
I can't wait to get out and about and visit all these, new distillers to me. That are in my backyard.
Well, we would love to host you, and we'll be in touch because that would be fun to show you around and give you the behind the scenes tour, which Marty and Lou have both experienced.
Couple things.
Yeah.
My blood they're making a serum out of my blood, much like in the Omega Man. So if you need to add any of that to your whiskey, could be a good selling point. I'm just saying.
I'll consider it. It's a finishing.
You can sell it in a small little 50 ml.
The ultimate teaspooning.
Somehow you sleep.
I was just going to mention there is a link down below to the Kings County Distillery website. So green little rectangle. Give it a little click.
I should also say we can ship directly to anybody in New York State, and we have a workaround to ship to most people around the country. So even if you are not vaccinated and you're still at home and want to stay at home, even if you hate people,
just want to social distance for other reasons.
Yes, right.
Really shedding who hates people. This is
Sometimes
the bad thing to do. Just order.
You can get most of our whiskeys in most states, one way or another, at this point. So,
Colin, just so you know, you have been watched by Christina in Berlin, Mauricio, hello, from Nicaragua, Brad from Panama, Andrew from Nashville, the very exotic Nashville. I believe that's Nashville, Tennessee, and then no small children. I don't know what that was referring to.
And Eric Owens. Hey, Eric.
Oh, Eric Owens. That's right. He was very excited to hear your story.
Yes.
Oh, but then he printed a bunch of Z's afterwards, so I think he fell asleep.
Right.
Hey, one last thing before we go. Just a little word, and since we're talking with you, we want to send out our condolences to a fellow New York distilling family, really. We lost Gable Arenzo just the other day. So we want to Gable and his father Ralph started Tuttletown Distillery, and he had his own distillery where he made apple brandy. He was a young man with a family, so we'd like to send out our condolences to Ralph and his wife and to Gable's young children.
Yeah. Gable gave me my first my tour at when I went up to Hudson, probably in 2008, and I was in love with it. I wanted the whole thing was just magical, and everything that they did, building Hudson as a brand, as a place, and contributing to New York State's distilling culture. Nobody has done more for New York State distilling than the Arenzo family. So.
And when your distillery has a waterfall, gosh darn it. I mean, you're sitting on a picnic table drinking whiskey with a waterfall with fish.
Yeah. We're going to try to get the East River rerouted so we get a little
you need cascade. The height is the problem. Yeah.
Or cave. We can build a cave.
I can never figure out which side Brooklyn. You guys aren't with the Hudson. The Hudson's on the other side, right?
Yeah. We're between Dumbo and Williamsburg. So
that clears things up for me.
Yeah. We're sort of across from the South Street Seaport. We're in the mix.
Very easy to get to. If you're in Manhattan, just go over the Brooklyn Bridge and go a couple blocks and boom, it's right there.
I'm just gonna swim over, so I'll be there.
Yes. I should also say we do have a couple new great whiskeys coming, so I might as well give those a plug.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We have a barrel strength whiskey coming out, and then we have a 6-year Blender's Reserve, which is all small format barrels that have gone for 6 years, which is really intense, kind of cool. A lot of people have been very snooty about small barrels, but when dealt with in a fun way, they can really make a dramatic, really kind of sweet, kind of almost a dessert whiskey that's really cool. So anyway, and it's 70% alcohol, barrel proof. So
what are the 5 countries you're available in?
The United Kingdom. We are available in Japan, Canada, Australia, and Korea, and maybe,
Good Korea.
Maybe that's it. That might be it.
What about Tierra del Fuego?
Not a country.
Not the country and not there.
It's
Panama. We're in
geographical
Panama.
location, Lou.
Right.
Put a bottle on it.
You can, we do have Panamanian distribution. That's not a joke.
Oh, there you go.
Amazing.
There you go.
All right,
Yeah.
Brad, check it
Right,
out.
yeah.
Brad's got it, man.
Brad's drinking it right now. Probably went out to the store to buy it.
Colin, it's been super nice having you on. I can't wait, to get out to the site and meet you in person and kind of explore the distillery and your whiskeys. So, yeah, it's been great having you on.
Thank you
good
so
time.
much.
Very thoughtful discussion for a change.
No,
No, it was.
always
We
fun to
kind of
chat.
goof around a lot, but
Yeah. I
I thought we
mean,
got into it here. That was good.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. I mean, I watched a couple of the other episodes, and you took good stuff out of people. which is
Yeah.
fun. So
Well, Colin's a Yale man, so it had to be a little
There you are.
more upscale, a little more serious.
yes,
You know what they say. You can always tell a Yale man.
Yeah, most of our other guests didn't graduate from high school, so this was
right.
yeah much.
Well, now on the other hand, next week we have
The Dave Wondrich. So,
who's
Oh, wow.
a professor, not just a graduate.
Yeah.
So
El
Yeah.
Profesor wrote.
yes,
That'd be
Dr.
a good
David
one.
Wondrich.
I saw Will posted a link to that very show for next week. So go ahead, get yourself signed up. It's actually our anniversary show.
Is this it? Yes. A whole year.
It's
Wow.
going to be a very special event. So please sign up and we'll see you back next week.
Because now we're doing it even though we don't have to.
I'm like a little bit surprised. All
Thanks,
right,
Colin.
thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you,
Colin.
guys.
Here's a
Guys,
round thing.
all be good.
Bye, guys.
Bye.